everyone. I am your host, Solar Requiem, and welcome to the Coliseum, where we support free speech over the censorship of ideas. Today, I have the utmost privilege of hosting this debate between Liquid Zulu and Alex on the issue of intellectual property. The preposition we agreed upon is a respect for intellectual property tends towards the destruction of civilization. In this debate, we will be discussing both reasons and justifications for both sides of the claim to see if there's any possibility for a solution or ultimatum in this debate. A reminder to the audience that both speakers consensually agreed to participate and face each other in this topic. Also, a reminder to both Liquid Zulu and Alex, there will be no interruptions when it's outside of your time. This is a formal Lincoln Douglas style debate. The structure is going to be pretty simple. You're going to have your opening topic. You're going to have your rebuttal. You're going to have your cross-examination, rebuttal response, and then finally sending it home with a closing argument. Afterwards, if you guys want to talk back and forth, you're more than welcome to do so. But in the meantime, I will have a timer on the background where each section besides the cross-examination will be 5 minutes long. Do I have any questions for both of you?
I have one question. I thought the contention was the enforcement of IP is a detriment to society. What was the one you said?
Oh, it's the one that we put down. What's it called? One moment. It is... Sorry, my computer skipped a little bit.
I was under the assumption of the one that Liquid just said.
Oh, sorry, that was my old note. Yes, enforcement. My apologies on that. So it's the enforcement of intellectual property as a detriment. Is that better?
Yeah.
Okay. With that out of the way, who was going to be starting first?
Never mind.
Zulu can go.
All right.
Okay. Whenever you start speaking, I'll start your timer. I'll let you know when you have 1 minute remaining. I'll just give you a visual or audio cue. Yeah.
All right. So the contention of this debate is whether the enforcement of IP is a detriment to society. There are two basic ways that something can be a detriment to society. One, it can be a moral detriment, or two, it could diminish the actual economic structures that make society possible. On the first point, enforcing copyright or patent involves enforcing a government-granted monopoly over some idea, with the smokescreen that there is some ideal platonic object owned by the holder of the IP. This is wrong. These ideal objects are mental abstractions that do not exist in the world, and as such it is impossible for there to be conflicts over them. Conflicts can occur only over scarce goods. On a proper understanding of IP, it is actually a negative easement. That is, it is an order given that other people are not allowed to use their own property in certain ways. This is profoundly immoral. It is a violation of the natural property rights of individuals and is nothing less than a partial expropriation of the property of those individuals. This is criminal, crime is immoral, and as such enforcing these intellectual monopolies is a moral detriment to society. Now for the second interpretation, that detriment to society means a hampering force against the economic structures that make society possible. Often the question is erroneously asked of what causes poverty. This is wrong because poverty is the default state of mankind. The real question is what causes prosperity. The answer, production. On this note, we can recall that IP is a form of negative easement. It is reducing the scope of activities that can be performed with one's own property. What this implies is that the value a man attaches to any given property he has will be relatively lower, all other things being equal. There are fewer ends that he can achieve with any capital goods that he has, so the goods are of a lower value. What this means is that the opportunity cost involved in producing capital goods will be higher than otherwise, because these capital goods can no longer be used in the production of as many consumers' goods. So production is relatively lower under a system of intellectual monopoly. This means that there will be an incentive towards consumption and away from saving, which means a relatively higher time preference than otherwise. But it is specifically the act of saving and investing saved funds, in a more roundabout production process that yields civilization. Civilization is impossible without such saving, and is hampered to the extent that such saving is hampered. Consider that a civilization involves a large structure of indirect exchange. Such indirect exchange can come about only if and insofar as men have saved enough capital in the past, such that they may exchange in the present, and further still that enough of these exchanges are taking place for money to emerge. Production and saving are the economic foundation of any society, and they are directly attacked by the enforcement of intellectual monopolies. I will note now that these IP grants were not formed for the purpose of promoting welfare. The United Kingdom performed no studies and made no economic arguments as to why enforcing letters of patent would improve society when they wrote the Statute of Anne. It is later, when we get to the US Constitution, that we have this notion that copyright and patents may be enacted by the government to promote the sciences and the useful arts. But again, the founding fathers provided no arguments as to why we should expect such monopoly grants to do this. So the question is, do such grants actually promote science and useful arts? Clearly not. If it was possible to place copyrights over mathematical and philosophical theorems, it is obvious the effect that this would have. To come up with some new theorem or formula, I would have to first pay all of the descendants of the various mathematicians whose lemmas and proofs I make use of. I would be at a complete dead end. It is the free use of information from others that makes it possible for anyone to do science or art. If every artist and every philosopher had to start from zero, and in fact was in an even worse spot than this, could not even take those steps from zero that had already been taken, nobody could do anything. It is on this point that I note the arbitrary nature of the length of IP protection afforded. If we were to accept that one can actually own an idea, why on earth should this ownership expire after some arbitrary period, chosen by the government? A consistent IP position would be that you actually own ideas forever. This position is negated by considering its consequences. If people can own ideas, this means that one must ask another before using his idea. But asking permission to use an idea is itself an idea. So you'd have to ask permission to ask permission, but then you'd have to ask permission to ask permission to ask permission, and so on ad infinitum. It is clear that a consistent IP position leads to complete ethical stasis and the near immediate death of humanity. So IP is not moral, and it does not promote the welfare of mankind. It lowers production is required for society, and it is profoundly immoral. So on both counts, IP is a detriment to society. And I'm done there.
All right, thank you very much for your time. Really good timing, actually. All right, sounds good. Alex, whenever you're ready for your opening statement, let me go and I'll start recording.
Okay, I'm ready.
Yep.
Okay. In today's debate, we'll be addressing the notion that the enforcement of IP laws leads to the detriment of society. Though this is a nuanced premise with defining what exactly can be characterized as a detriment along with actions of enforcement, I will prove that IP laws, though at times flawed and abused like any other system, provide an essential element to innovation in modern-day society. My opponent seeks to prove a history of IP law being rather inconsequential to invention and innovation and can actually stifle such pursuits. There are plenty of examples that counter this claim and, more importantly, are relevant and representative of our current needs. Since the Industrial Revolution, society has become more and more complex, with various technologies becoming more advanced. Most of the world participates in a global economy, sourcing material needs from other regions and countries. All cash in hand to purchase goods, subject to branding and marketing, very much participating in global capitalism. This isn't an endorsement of capitalism or all the ways it can be abused. It's just a statement of fact that this is how the world evolved over the last 100 years. With capitalism comes commercialism and related incentives to the process of creation and research and development. Any entrepreneur trying to sell a specific product or new experience or service knows that investors will always inquire about a utility or design patent. They always want to protect their investments and mitigate risk. To come up with something novel, unique, emblematic of a trusted brand becomes harder and harder with each passing day as humans conquer more frontiers. Basically, we're having to build on foundational knowledge and improve upon it in some way. Naturally, I think that if it were easy, it would have been done before. The perfect example of this is the pharmaceutical industry. The first generation of developed drugs were characterized as being small molecule based on chemical compounds. Even under patent, they were cheaper to manufacture and purchase. Now, many new pharmaceuticals are classified as specialty drugs, meaning they generally treat chronic, complex, and rare conditions like cancer and nervous system disorders such as Alzheimer's and Parkinson's disease. As a side note, we're seeing dramatic increases in these more complex ailments because of the presence of toxins, pollution, processed foods, and even long COVID. Many specialty drugs are biologics, meaning they are large molecule drugs based on living cell lines, which are very costly to develop. The amount of money allocated to R&D is directly proportional to the potential earnings of a drug. On average, the development and testing of a new drug is $1 to $2 billion. Patents are the only thing preventing another company from reverse engineering a drug and outcompeting based on price. They're the only thing protecting that huge initial investment and worthiness of the pursuit. Throughout the debate, I will show how patents encourage very sophisticated, evolved innovation to address our most pressing issues today, like climate change, diminishing resources such as food, and the increasing risk of future pandemics, along with encouraging the generation and growth of small to medium-sized enterprises around the world. And I conclude my time.
All right, thank you very much. Now for the next portion, Liquid Zulu, you're going to be doing a rebuttal. A reminder, please do a rebuttal to the position presented. And yeah, whenever you're ready, I'll start your timer.
Sure. So the first point there that I got was that IP is an essential element to innovation. So then I can just simply come up with some counterexamples where we have innovation without IP. So the general theory of relativity, you can't. Einstein never got a patent on that. I don't think he was able to. I don't think he would have been able to get a patent on it. That's massively innovative. All open source software, to my knowledge, is basically none of it's being controlled by these intellectual monopolies. You're allowed to freely use it. It's free software, like Libre. So that's massive innovation. So there's two big billy counterexamples right there. And all the innovation up to the Statute of Anne, of course, none of that was under intellectual monopoly. So then there's also the point that society has become more complex since the Industrial Revolution, with my assumption being that this has been caused by the enforcement of intellectual property. But I would say this is not the case. Society has indeed, there is more capital now, there is more technological development, but I would say this is in spite of, not because of IP. It needs to be shown that this is actually because IP is there that actually spurs on innovation, which to do that you'd have to attack the deductive argument I gave earlier, proving that IP in fact reduces the amount of production that you can engage in. So why on earth would you expect more technological development if you are less able to innovate on those previous designs because you're not allowed to use them? So investors will inquire about patents. Their investors are seeking patents a lot. I agree with that. But people obviously, if you got a lot of money, you want to seek a monopoly grant, because that way, if you have a monopoly grant on your thing, then you can just rest on your laurels for 17 or 75 years, depending on what the term is. The fact that people are wanting these monopoly grants does not demonstrate that they actually promote society at all. It does not demonstrate that they are not a detriment to society. You can imagine like a bunch of people might want a cartel. Cartels are impossible in a free market, but they're very possible if you have these intellectual monopolies. So then, with respect to the pharma industry, Phoenix was saying there that, well, all these new pharma drugs, they're like large molecule, they're very specialized, and it's very costly to develop these new drugs. I would say the biggest cost in the pharma industry is from the Food and Drug Administration. That's not some natural cost that you have. If you abolish the FDA, then those costs go away, right? And patents are the only thing preventing others from out competing. Well, I would say competition is good. I agree that those are the only thing preventing others from out competing these big insulin manufacturers and whatnot. But that's bad. It's bad that this thing exists. So on the note of the farm industry, actually, we have let's see here. Yeah, so the British Medical Journal did a survey that I sent you earlier, where they surveyed the readers for the biggest medical breakthroughs of the 20th century or something, and 2 out of 15 were able to be patented or had some influence over their creation. Then the U.S. Centers of Disease Control had a top 10 list, and none of the items on its top 10 list of biggest achievements in the 20th century had anything to do with patents. The Chemical Engineering News magazine compiled a list of the top-selling pharmaceutical products, like top-selling, and they had 46 they had a list of 46, and of that 46, patents had nothing to do with 20 of them. And of the drugs that on the list that patents did have something to do with, 4 were discovered completely by chance, so clearly they weren't going for these things for patents. 2 were discovered in university labs, long before the Bayh-Dole Act, which would allow them to make money off of government-funded research, and was before the Bayh-Dole was even conceived, so clearly they weren't going for it for the patents. And several others were simultaneously discovered by more than one company, leading to lengthy and costly legal battles. And that's another problem with IP, is you're shifting a bunch of your resources, not just into those patentable goods as against non-patentable goods, but also into enforcing your patents. You're funneling millions and millions and billions of dollars into this massive legal apparatus to collect all these patents and go to war with the other big businesses. Because, of course, small businesses can't get these massive patent treasure troves to engage in these patent wars like the big guys can. And with that, I'm done responding.
Okay, yeah, there are several points there.
Hey, 1 minute. You ready to go? So I gotta
Yeah.
start. All right, go ahead.
Okay. Okay, so trying to figure out which point to address first. Right. So you're kind of proving my point when we're talking about the advancement of pharmaceuticals, where they get more and more complex and specialized, right? Like it makes sense that, again, the first generation of drugs would be things that were more or less like simple chemical compounds, or even accidentally discovered, or again, drugs are always being repurposed as they go through the rounds of testing and clinical studies, right? And that's the thing too, like if you're trying to talk about abolishing the FDA, then you lose all standards and safety protocols for these drugs that, again, like I think that would be a bad thing. I don't think I would want to take any drug or buy food that hadn't been approved by the FDA. In fact, like you can, like in Europe, they have harder or more stringent regulations on what food is, what ingredients can go in foods, what things, how they're processed. So, like again, I don't know, like if you want to bring up regulations, and this argument about IP law, because that's kind of the point. Like that is the reason why pharmaceuticals specifically are so expensive, because as you're trying to solve more difficult ailments, more complex problems with a drug, and there are more and more regulations in place to protect people from experiencing any kind of adverse side effects from a drug, you have to go through thorough clinical trials. And I'm all for that. Again, when we remember like what happened during COVID and how like all the resources that were spent on trying to perfect what mechanism to that a vaccine would utilize, right? What would be the most efficacious, provide the most protection, and again, have the least amount of side effects. So there's plenty of commentary saying that like even those drugs wait and see, even though like in the background, that type of drug based on mRNA had been developed for decades. That mechanism alone. So that's what we're talking about. Like there's a level of nuance when we're addressing like advancement of pharmaceuticals. And if they didn't have all that prior investment, if they didn't have the protection of a patent, no one would. I mean, even though, right, this was a critical need and you had government subsidizing this, but outside of that, like you're going to have just like universities, companies, scientists not going through with research because they ultimately can't carry it out because like the technology involved is crazy expensive. And because there are regulations in place for testing, there's just, again, an average $1 to $2 billion associated with any new drug. And so when you're talking about, for example, like addressing climate change needs and the production of food, there's a report that I provided to you earlier, and I'll just read out some stats. So the CPVR program listed out that, hold on. In absence of that system, that in 2020, the production of arable crops in the EU would be 6 to 4% lower. Production of fruit would be 2.6% lower. Vegetables would be 4.7% lower. And the output of ornamentals would be 15.1% lower. Without the added production attributable to CPVR protected crops, the EU's trade position with the rest of the world would worsen. For some crops, the EU might even switch from being a net exporter to a net importer, and EU consumers would face higher food prices. The annual greenhouse gas GHG emissions from agriculture and horticulture are reduced by 62 million tons per year. This corresponds to the total GHG footprint of Hungary, Ireland, and Portugal. Many of the companies protecting their innovations of CPVRs are small and medium-sized enterprises. These small companies account for more than 90% of the registrants of CPVRs and hold 60% of all CPVRs currently in force. So that, again, that shows how when you have a network, with patents and protecting and encouraging innovation, and you have a system in place for investment, that this is what happens. Like when we have more complex needs to address with, again, climate change, harder situations, harder environments to grow crops, right? And then dramatically trying to decrease the output of carbon emissions, that takes a lot of sophisticated technology. And of course, that requires more investment, more R&D.
All right, sounds good. Next portion we're going up is cross-examination. Both of you guys have been on my debate platform before. You know what it is. But for the audience, Liquid Zulu basically is going to be able to be in the driver's seat and ask Alex a series of questions. When he's done with his question, he can simply say, like, I yield my time. And then it's going to be hopped over to Alex. So whenever you're ready, go ahead.
All right. So, in your response there, Alex, you mentioned the COVID vaccines, and in fact, Moderna waived their patent rights. So, if it's the case that you need, patents for all this innovation, like with the COVID vaccines, then why would Moderna waive their patent rights? Why would they bother making the vaccine if they can't get a monopoly on it?
I referenced the long COVID vaccine as a need that crops up when we are facing a global pandemic, and you do have the world's governments willing to pony up the cost, pay for the development and production, and then even very much encourage, if not mandate, usage of those vaccines. Right? They've already got a given clientele, so to speak, and they already know that these investments will be recouped, and then again, like, governments are doing it to protect their investment in their own economy, right? Like, you can't have people out sick or dying like crazy, and they, like, ultimately it was an economic decision to make sure that people could stay in the office, they could work in the factories, right? Like, we saw a lot of issues with having a workforce and just the farms and agriculture, like and supply chains. We saw the economic fallout from this pandemic, right? So it was very much in everyone's interest to protect that and to hasten that whole process of development and production. Now, you have to think about what would have happened if we didn't have this huge global pandemic warning that interest and investment, right? Like think about how mRNA vaccines, just as that mechanism alone, how that spawned further research into using that a similar mechanism, not the same thing, to treat cancer. Like it because we proved the viability of that alone because of this vaccine, it opened the door for further research that ultimately wouldn't have happened, right? But because there's a proof of concept there, because people, like other entities, companies, research institutions, they have potential patent protections to protect further investment. They can explore these new opportunities, right? So again, I will say, in the economic sense, COVID was very unique, but it did spawn further research that now has patent protection.
Well, I mean, it seems there that you've just said that all this innovation came from this apparently non-patented thing, but I can move on to I think the bigger problem here is that you're saying, like, oh, this CPBR program, they're saying, like, oh, we'd have so much more innovation if we have this. You're saying that I'm proving your point, like, but like fundamentally, I have this deductive argument demonstrating that it's all else being equal is necessarily going to be the case that you have less production if you have IP being enforced. This is one of my two-pronged attack. I attacked on the moral grounds and on the economic grounds for how society is even possible. So do you have a response to my deductive argument that I provided?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's based in reality, to be honest. We live in a global economy that very much embraces capitalism, where to get anything done, research developed, requires investment, requires money. You don't see just the one-off person being able to grab a ton of money and go invent the next greatest drug, right? Like, you need outside investment. I'm saying that patents are the vehicle that encourage this type of investment, right? Because the thing is that people can always retro engineer something, or again, provide another layer of competition, which, yeah, on the surface you could say benefits the consumer. But the thing is that innovation wouldn't have happened in the first place if that investment isn't protected. And we can even talk to AI, generative AI, and what that is doing to the creative industry, right? A lot of people, because you can't patent AI generated material, a lot of people are reconsidering if they're going to actually use AI tools like ChatGPT or Midjourney. There's also a lot of concerns and just outcry from creatives that are worried that that their their intellectual property is out there in data lakes, being kind of sourced and scraped, unlicensed, basically serving up as training data that then you can provide that kind of derivative material, right? That that goes against the fairness doctrine of IP. So that's the thing that they're worried about, like, because that presumes that that certain, like, in certain cases, like, you can assume that you can use licensed material.
Make sure we're not going into monologuing or anything like that. If you could, like, question, answer, question, answer. Alex, you're gonna have your time to do the exact same thing. No, you're fine. Just want to give you guys a heads up.
Okay. No, I was just using that as an example to say that we're seeing what happens now when with this whole idea of not being able to have patents on a lot of creative generated material content and the backlash from that, right? So there are a lot of lawsuits that are going forward about, like, when do you issue a patent? Can an AI tool actually own a patent? Then there's just so many layers to that. And again, what they do is they're like, I can't get credit for my intellectual property, right? I can't collect on it, particularly if I try to do it through the means of an AI tool. So they just refrain from using it, right? Because this is the ultimate imperative to function in our current society of capitalism.
All right. So you mentioned there. I'll just quickly touch on this. That there was an outcry over creatives over their loss of IP. But I mean, these small creators, these small artists on Twitter and whatnot, they already don't have IP protection. And you know how I know that? Because they all watermark their work. They know that they can't afford to go to court if some guy takes the commission and doesn't pay. They already know this. They already operate as if they don't have IP protection, because in practice they don't, and yet they still manage to create somehow. But fundamentally, like you said, that, well, my deductive argument is not based in reality, but, like, which premises aren't based in reality? Because I can restate my argument. It's basically that if you have intellectual monopolization, then there are fewer things that you can do with your property, which means that you have a relatively lower value on things that you have on your consumer's goods, because there are fewer things that you can do with it. So this, with respect to capital goods which produce other goods, means that there are fewer things that you're allowed to produce with your capital goods. Like, if I have a printing press, I'm not allowed to produce certain books. So there are fewer things that I can use a printing press for. This means that the opportunity cost, I can get less profits over time of having a given capital good. The profits I can get from it are lower. So this means that the opportunity cost of saving up for a printing press or any other capital good is relatively higher. So therefore, there will be less of these roundabout production processes, and these roundabout production processes are the most efficient ones. So therefore, there's going to be less production than otherwise, which premise here is not based in reality.
I think that, like, having cherry-picked examples throughout history, when it shows that, like,
no,
yes,
I didn't cherry-pick examples. I want to be clear. Like, this is just a complete,
really,
like, pure deductive argument.
No,
like, it's general.
Okay, right, but I think that, like, this deductive logic doesn't really apply, because, again, the whole argument is that we're talking about the I guess now it's detriment of society, right? The enforcement leads to detriment of society, when overall we've seen advancement and technology and arts and sciences, and that because of that, just trending upward, trending into more evolved, advanced states of goods and services, of technologies, that's why it makes it harder to develop and create something novel, because as I mentioned before, you're basing that on already this foundation of knowledge, right? So again, I think that counters your original point that, like, we're not trending downwards to, like, the detriment or real destruction of society. That this is because we've kind of all agreed that we're just going to do this whole capitalism thing globally, and like we're going to use fiat currency to buy and sell products, and we've got an exchange rate, and you've got this whole small world phenomenon with the internet and being able to buy goods from all over and have them shipped, and just that whole just dynamic, the way our economies function together, means that that cash is always important, right? Investment is always important. And you don't have a lot of like one-offs or individuals or, small companies or entities that if they don't have the cash, like these things don't get developed, right? And so there is a whole ecosystem of investors or grants or, but you have to ultimately prove the worthiness of that investment. And you have to protect it. You have to assure that like you can earn that money back. Otherwise, people just out of sheer selfishness because of human nature and own financial to invest in that. Like you can dislike humanity, you can dislike how the current world functions economically, but that's just the reality of the situation. This is the only way that this works. Like having true innovation that ultimately will require more and more layers of sophistication, particularly like, and even just pharmaceuticals. I mean, that's even just there, we can say that like that, and then addressing agricultural needs, for example, are core things to help preserve humanity going forward.
So,
Okay.
Sorry. What were you going to say?
No, go ahead, Zulu. This last question. Again, Alex, please try to refrain from going on a point with that, and then we're going to flip it over.
All right. So, basically, Alex, there you said that the deductive logic that I gave doesn't apply because we have seen advancement. But the fact that we've seen advancement does not negate my thesis. My thesis was not that if you enforce IP at all, then there will be no advancement. I'm saying that enforcement of IP is a detriment to production. It's a detriment. It's a hampering force against production. So why does my deductive argument not apply? And please just stick to this question. Why does my deductive argument not apply? What it would mean for it to not apply is that the premises do not actually correspond to reality. So which one of the premises, or maybe there's multiple of them, do not correspond to reality?
Because I don't think enforcement is a detriment to society in this respect. Because I think that knowing that...
Alex, can you answer the question he asked, though?
I'm literally trying to answer it. That the enforcement of IP, the threat of enforcement of IP is the only thing that the only reason that people will honor a patent to begin with. That is, it's the enforcement that makes it actually work. So that's my answer.
Okay, we're gonna flip it over now. Alex, you're gonna be doing cross-examination for Zulu, and same thing, but just roles reversed. Whenever you're ready, go ahead. That was roughly about 10 to 12 minutes, so I'd say fair enough to give you the same time. If you don't need that much time, then by all means, you don't have to. Just, as we go over to the next section. Whenever you're ready, go ahead.
Okay. I'm curious as to what, given the current state of the world, the economy, the situation I described earlier, what would a person do if they need a ton of money to invest in new technology? How would they get that? How would they find investors? What are the options here?
Well, it's not my job to tell people how to find investors. If I knew how to get millions of dollars for some new product, then if I wouldn't be here debating, I'd be going off and getting millions of dollars for some new product. It's difficult to find venture capital funding. That's true, but some of the ways you can still fund yourself without IP. Oh, I've got an example. I released a course a while back. I made it very clear that you are allowed to pirate the entire course. I released the entire text version for free. Anybody's allowed to make any derivative works from it. And I still made more money off that than I've made in the entire ad revenue or anything else on this online, ecosystem type, we could call it, I suppose. So given the economy, how do you get funding for these projects? Well, figure out how to monetize. Figure it out, it's not my job to make sure that Disney can sit on their laurels for 50, 70, 80 years and not have to do anything, and they can just keep reaping rewards from it. It's their job to figure out how to monetize it. If YouTubers can figure out how to monetize, then I think Disney can probably work it out.
Right. And then it gets to the point where you hit a critical mass of following or notoriety, basically, where people will try to rip you off and either package your content, sell it into different markets, and then maybe like potentially curb earnings that you would have had. So I mean, it's very easy to critique a system, right? And offer no solutions or alternatives and be like, that's not my problem, right? But the thing is that oh, you have an echo. But the thing is that if you're going to say it's so easy to monetize any operation, or it's so easy to innovate and do the R&D, even though we're even talking about initiatives, things that like might be vital down the road. Like, again, I'll talk about long COVID. That is dramatically causing issues like in every system of your body, right? Like we're just seeing increases in everything, and like cancer, Alzheimer's, blood clots, strokes, heart attacks, whatever. So we'll need some sophisticated therapies for that, as this is like a mass destabilizing or disabling event. So given that, how does one fund that if the current situation is that investors will pony up millions of dollars, potentially billions, to solve those kinds of problems, but will only do that if they can protect their investment or have some level of assurances. So when you're talking on that scale for solutions that we dramatically need as as a species, what is there to do? I mean, to me, it almost seems like bad faith if you don't have a suggestion or alternative.
Well, I did provide an alternative. I explained how YouTubers have already worked out how to monetize in the lack of IP. YouTube videos can be downloaded very easily. Even movies. Like I can go on to any sort of nefarious website and download any new movie as soon as it comes out. Basically, like there's already with the internet, there's already basically no IP protections at all. It's just when they'll go after some people. But you can still very, very easily get around this type of thing, and yet somehow businesses are still able to make money. And fundamentally, your failed business model it ain't my problem, right? If you can't figure out how to make money off of insulin, which saves people's lives, then maybe you shouldn't be a capitalist at that point. People are able to make money off water. You can't patent water. And yet somehow all these businesses are able to make money off of selling water. How do they do it? It's crazy. This happens all the time. It's really like you were able to monetize without having a monopoly. This notion that you have to have a monopoly in order to monetize is simply ridiculous.
I cannot believe you're having an equivalency to naturally occurring things like water and insulin, which is a hormone in our bodies. What I'm talking about, like things that require insane.
Well, insulin is
precise...
patented. Be clear, you can patent insulin. That's why it's so expensive.
Yeah, the delivery mechanism, sure.
No, the actual insulin itself. That's why Open Insulin Project have to make a biosimilar rather than a bioreplicate, because the bioreplicates, which are easier to get approved, by the way, they are all patented. They have patents over like literally the molecular formula.
My point is that in the R&D phase, right? So like it's very easy to simulate and synthesize, a form of insulin, right? Because we already know what it looks like, how it functions. When you're talking about something that's completely novel, unproven in that capacity, and you really have to have a leap of faith to do it, to show that there's even some plausibility there. And it's really expensive, requires a lot of money. But these are the, dude, I'm getting a weather alert. Sorry. Okay. That these are the problems that require, again, very involved solutions that like I don't think just doing a side hustle with YouTube's would fund that initial research, right? Like someone's got to pony up a lot of money somewhere, and they're always going to want to protect their investment. Now your examples are very like small in scope and scale, right? And like one-off individuals. When you're trying to, gather a whole team of researchers, scientists across the world, when you have to pay tons of money just to, you have to have these like very much climate controlled rooms, for example, to interact with certain ingredients. I mean, the whole process can become incredibly expensive. I think like your whole point rests on just kind of like, I mean, not to be mean, but like some kind of naivete where you don't know about the process, and just R&D and manufacturing of a lot of products that we basically take for granted.
So yeah, I would agree. There are these new techs which are super expensive and super hard to develop. And boy, if only we had more saved funds to invest in these types of things, and we could take more gambles like that. Oh, wait a minute, we would have more saved funds, other things being equal, if we didn't have the enforcement of intellectual monopolies. And this idea that it doesn't take an entire room of researchers and millennia to figure out how to bottle water, that's also just ridiculous, because it did take that. So we're going to have more stuff to invest in these brand new risky technologies if we don't have intellectual monopolies. So if you want more investment in those things, then maybe if we have more funds to invest, then we'd be fine,
Actually, I came across some statistics that showed that in industries that practiced a lot of patenting, that there was more variability in the products because they have to innovate. Because the nature of patents is that you do have to have a certain amount of differentiation to get another patent on a different product, right? You have to, and then because of that, you have to figure out like, well, what's worth the investment? What's the market share? What would be, what would be appealing to people? So just in that sense, it forces innovation, because like I think one example was like the beer industry. They have way less patents, and so you have like a monopoly actually of like a couple of big manufacturers and distributors. But actually, like when you have industries that are more heavily patented, you do have more variation of who's owning that industry, and the size and scope of these different organizations or companies. So I just think that these points are rather unfounded and just kind of based on cherry-picked information.
I mean, are you seriously making the claim that there are less monopolies when you don't have patents, when you open up these ideas to free market competition? That's when you have less. When you open these ideas up to more competition, that's when you have more monopolies than if you literally have a letter of patent, a monopoly right over who is allowed to use a given idea. That is ludicrous. What statistic could possibly prove that? It's just.
But how are you're equating all patents, copyrights, trademarks to like some monopoly grant or monopoly right when like
because they are.
That's not common. I mean, they're not though. I mean, that's
so what
the
are
thing.
They?
Like,
if they're not a monopoly grant over a given pattern of information, which by the way, that's what the U.S. courts call it. They call it a monopoly. That's what it was originally called. The one after the Statute of Anne, I can't remember exactly what it's called, but it's like the monopoly something or another. Like this is, everybody knows that these things are in fact monopolies. It's only after we have these free market acts, all these free marketeers attacking. Like, why are we having these monopoly grants over information? That's when this whole term of like, oh no, it's not a monopoly grant. It's actually an intellectual property right. People like Ayn Rand bend themselves over backwards trying to defend why this is actually a property right, but it's not. It's a negative easement. It's a monopoly grant. That's just what it is.
I mean, for one, that's not true. I mean, it's like, again, when you talk about the levels of differentiation, because like, again, I'm saying it's forcing innovation. You've got, like, look at software, right? You can actually, if you have like a 10% differentiated software, you can get a patent. And actually,
go ahead and finish what you're going to say, and then go into your last statement for Liquid Zulu. So, like, just wrap up like the point against his point, and then we'll do last statement.
Okay. Yeah. So, I don't. Well, I guess I have one more question. So, like, again, we're seeing like, I think of monopoly like a whole industry being monopolized by by few or one, like, producers and manufacturers, when actually, like, if you look in a space, you see that there are similar like products. They're not identical, but it can actually encourage the building of an industry, right? Because again, like, people's ideas and investments are protected And then, people who, and then I think you gave me something where it was citing like first one out the gate, right? That if you can establish a brand, you're the first one out the gate with an idea, people will show loyalty and you're fine, you're protected. That's actually like not the true at all. You look at trends, buying trends from, well, that was in something that you cited. I think you've said it on YouTube before. You can take that back, that's fine. But like with that idea, is that you see a lot of advancement in software, for example. You see like, and technologies. Steve Jobs always said like, you want to be like the second gen. You want to take the original idea and evolve upon it, right? So it's that forced levels of differentiation, hopefully associated improvement that encourages innovation. Because again, like our buying habits now, we hardly practice any brand loyalty anymore. Gen Z, millennials, we're always looking at reviews on Amazon and finding like, well, what's the best thing out there? I'll buy that. I don't give a shit about the brand. So that's what I'm saying. It's like these arguments might have been true at one point, but they no longer stand to be, true of the current economy or buying behaviors.
What was the question?
No, well, my question with that was like, well, do you still agree with that point, or that point that was made in the source that you cited me? And also, I want to know how you know that there's automatically going to be savings involved that's just going to be out there randomly in some savings account to fund whatever projects that would have been what you were arguing would have been compromised or hurt or suffered with patents.
Well, I gave the argument as to why there would be more savings sans intellectual monopoly than otherwise. And it was a deductive argument earlier. Sorry, I'm stuttering. But yeah, your negation of that, your argument against that was basically just restating your thesis. Your argument against, I asked you, which of the premises are not corresponding to reality, which would make it a false argument. And you said, well, the premise which is false is that the enforcement of IP is not a detriment to society. But that's not a premise, that's the conclusion. Right? You have to attack one of the premises, not the conclusion. You can't just negate the conclusion to attack an argument. So that's an answer to your question of why there would be more savings otherwise. It's the deductive argument. And,
but that doesn't answer anything. I mean, like, in practice.
All right, we're going to go over to rebuttal response now. Liquid Zulu, whenever you're ready. You go ahead and speak, and I'll start your timer. 5 minutes, same as always.
So wait, what is this section doing?
Rebuttal response. So rebuttal response is basically leading up to this point, what has been said during this debate, your response to these things that would support your argument and critique your opponents.
Sure. Okay. So, I suppose I'll restate that I have essentially by default won on the moral point because no counter arguments have been provided. So that's 1 point in my hat here. Then on the economic point, the economic structure, Phoenix has been incapable of actually showing where my argument has gone wrong. All Phoenix has been able to do is restate her thesis here, but restating a thesis is not demonstrating the falsehood of its negation, right? You have to actually go about and demonstrate that falsehood here. So we have all this we have all this talk about the pharmaceutical industry, how that needs patents because all these things are so complicated. Well, I mean, technology has always been complicated. It's always been very hard to do these things, and we haven't needed it in the past. We haven't needed it for the Moderna vaccine, which I guess that's probably very complicated. I don't know how those things work, but they waived their patent rights, and Phoenix went on a whole long tirade about how innovative that vaccine was and how much innovation it has spurred. And then Phoenix has come in with this reason point of, well, if you have intellectual monopolies over these things, that means that you're going to be forced to innovate more because you have to differentiate your product as much as possible. This is not how monopolies work at all. If you have some sort of monopoly over a steam engine design and you've monopolized the entire shebang, you can't improve on that very much unless you make like an internal combustion engine or something, just a way bigger improvement, like, because they've already patented basically every component in there, and then they can make a small improvement and patent that new thing. That's how they keep the insulin patents going for so long. They make some small tweak, and then it's so similar to the original one that the original one, even though it's out of patent, it's still liable for patent infringement if you make the original one. It is ludicrous to suggest that this is spurring innovation, and that the other point that you actually have less monopolies when you have intellectual monopolies, right? That's A is not A, basically. So I suppose the big point here is that my deductive argument has not been attacked. My moral argument has not been attacked, neither has my deductive argument. Both stand, and therefore I currently am winning the debate, then.
Is it my go?
Yeah, I'm done.
Oh, look at you on with that?
Yeah.
Okay. Whenever you're ready, Alex, go ahead and start. I'll start your timer.
Sure. I mean, like, you can say you won the debate. You can make these assertions about your deductive logic. You can say that I brought nothing to the table when all I've done is actually cite real life examples and acknowledge the state of like how our global economy works. How we have to have money to support most innovation, and most creatives want to protect their ideas. They at least want to get some kind of acknowledgement for it, and where like even copyrights and trademarks make a lot of sense, because like you can very easily like rip off a trademark and try to position yourself as a brand. And that actually isn't good to consumers, because like if they're going to buy a specific brand, they trust it for various reasons in that company. And again, it's just like there are obvious reasons why these things have come about, right? Like, again, like people, if you do want to talk about brand loyalty, they can protect their brand. Copyrights protect, creative materials, content, and then ultimately patents can be very helpful when you're talking about very huge investments. That if you need to have an investor take a leap of faith and give you some millions of dollars to do something, they're going to want to have it protected. They want to know that, like, at least for some years after that investment, they can recoup the funds and then some, because like a lot of people want to have a return on their investment. That's just how it is. I don't think that people just want to or can or have the financial freedom to just throw money away on bad business pursuits, right? Even if, like, you could say there is an imperative to find a solution for that problem. The way the world works, the way we live in capitalism, the way that like you need money to survive, that's all well and good. I just don't see like random coffers of savings or people just out of the goodness of their heart donating like huge sums of money. I mean, look at these billionaires. They could solve hunger overnight, and they don't, right? It's just it speaks to just human nature and behavior overall. So given like we're always trying to protect our self-interest, but yet we have to make innovation seem worthwhile, that this is a necessary component of the process, right? Particularly in our current climate of complexity and noise and bombardment and commercialism, like you have to stand out. You have to try to justify any kind of investment. It's just the nature of the beast, right? Like that's just reality.
Okay. Now we're going to be doing our final portion of this debate. It's going to be a closing argument. So closing arguments, basically up until this point, you saying to the audience why they should support your position, why you believe you won this debate, why you're right, and yeah, you guys can take it from here. So Liquid, you're going to be up first. Whenever you're ready, I'll start your timer.
Sure. So we established in the beginning that there are basically two avenues you could take in this debate. There is the avenue of what is the actual economic structural foundation of society. So a detriment would be anything that hampers that. And then there's the ethical argument, the moral argument. What is that? Is this a moral detriment to society? Is this a bad thing? So on the economic side of things, I gave my deductive argument, which has not been challenged. All that's been done is to state the negation of its conclusion, which is not how you attack an argument. You attack an argument by demonstrating how one of its premises or one or multiple of its premises are false. This has not been done. And as far as the ethical side of things, I gave the argument that, well, these things are actually infringing on natural property rights. This has not been attacked. Nothing in my ethical argument has been attacked. And even if we're having some sort of consistent IP approach, because if you have some inconsistent IP approach, then clearly this is going to be an arbitrary ethic and therefore a false ethic. This is an incorrect argument. If you're having just these arbitrary, oh, we'll sometimes apply it here and sometimes there. No, it has to be actually applying always. It has to be, or else it's sometimes true, sometimes false, and then A is no longer A, and you have all these problems arising. So if you have this consistent IP position, it's literally impossible for humanity to survive on this. If you have to ask permission to do anything, then you'd have to ask permission to walk, you'd have to ask permission to eat, you'd have to ask permission to do anything, because asking permission is an idea. You could come up with that idea of asking permission, right? So you'd have to ask permission to do that, and then you'd have to ask permission to do that, and so on ad infinitum. It would be impossible to do anything. Everybody would quickly die. This is a death ethic. It cannot ensure the survival of humanity. This is surely like the greatest defeat of any sort of ethical proposal. The IP is evil. It's simply evil, and it attacks the fundamental economic foundations of society, and it is evil on both points. Whether you take this debate to be moral or economic, both points Alex fails on. That's me done.
Okay, sounds good. Alex, whenever you're ready, go ahead and finish this up with your closing argument.
Okay, well, the premise itself is highly subjective. It's like, how do you exactly quantify, destruction of society, detriment to society, and then again, like when you're talking about morality, I would think that wanting to, given the current economic model that we all live in, and making it so that, people can keep adding to the layers of innovation. They can work within that model. They have funding to go after such research, design, what have you. That they get to answer these imperatives that are out there, right, to solve the world's problems. I think that affirms the morality around it. If we want to say that like our values are protecting humanity, advancing humanity, anticipating problems that will arise and being able to address that with creative solutions. And yet we still have to work within the confines and the model of the current economic system. But something that is a tool to do that lends itself to the morality side of the equation, right? That it gives us the possibility to do that. Because the thing is that the real unjust thing is capitalism itself, is that we can't just like freely go and come up and design and research and develop things, because we are always under the limiting force of capitalism, of not having the funds ourselves or the materials to actually do these things, to prove them as concepts, to then manufacture them. So because of that, like you could say all day that like patents stifle creativity, or just this whole process of creation and then development and then production. But the thing is, it's that we don't have the resources to do that to begin with, not for these more complex solutions that are needed. That is just living in capitalism. And if you can acknowledge that, you can understand that based on human nature, people want to protect their investments, want to protect themselves. So patents are just the vehicle that allows that to happen. And again, when you talk about situations that threaten that very model of innovation, like AI, generative tools, that people tend to freak out, that creatives are going to be less inclined to use that technology because they can't necessarily, patent their, or copyright the things that are produced from AI. Because again, there's a certain level of question of like, how much influence did that creator have, right? And again, there's always what are the AIs pulling from? They could potentially be grabbing ideas and information, but that's the whole thing, is like that kind of throws a wrench into this whole system, where because we live in a capitalistic society, because we need money to do anything, this is how you can monetize it. This is how you can survive, and ultimately this is how you can advance when you get people to fund your pursuits. Otherwise, there's nothing at your disposal to actually do it, to facilitate it, to really get to that solution beyond the idea. This allows for the actual manifestation of the idea.
All right, thank you very much. And with that, that concludes tonight's debate, with the proposition being the enforcement of IP is a detriment. Thank you, Liquid Zulu, and thank you, Alex, for both participating. For audience listening in right now, this debate is part of this. This is the second round of the tournament. So again, applaud you guys both for getting this far so far.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
But yes, it was a pleasure having you.
Enjoyed it.
Agreed. Yeah, that's all for me for now. I'll keep you guys both updated and posted on what the judge panel's results are. But for now, that should be all and concludes for